The blood-red sun dipped below the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, where Zora Blake stood frozen on her porch, watching a stranger ride into town with the kind of easy confidence only a man unacquainted with grief could possess. Zora pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, even though the Arizona evening remained warm. 3 years a widow, and still the sight of a handsome stranger made her retreat inside herself like a turtle into its shell. She turned to go inside when a commotion down the street caught her attention. The stranger had dismounted and was now standing between young Tommy Wilson and 3 of the Murphy boys, who had been terrorizing the town for months. "I suggest you find yourselves another hobby," the stranger said, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Picking on a boy half your size ain't exactly the mark of men with courage." The tallest Murphy boy spit in the dust. "And who might you be to tell us our business?" The stranger adjusted his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Name's Preston Xavier. Just passing through, though I reckon I might stay a while if the welcome improves." Something about the way he stood relaxed, but ready made the Murphy boys reconsider. They backed away, muttering threats but making no move to follow through. Young Tommy looked up at the stranger with undisguised hero worship before scampering away. Zora realized she'd been holding her breath only when Preston Xavier's gaze met hers across the street. He tipped his hat, and she ducked inside her house, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. The next morning, Zora was arranging fresh baked bread in the display case of her bakery when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to find Preston Xavier filling the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the morning sunlight. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Followed my nose here. That bread smells like heaven itself." Zora tucked a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Thank you, just came out of the oven." "I'll take a loaf then, and whatever else you recommend." His smile was easy, undemanding. As she wrapped the bread, Zora felt his eyes on her, not intrusive, just curious. "You're new in town," she said, immediately regretting stating the obvious. "Arrived yesterday. Looking for work. I hear the Double R Ranch might be hiring." Zora nodded. "Mr. Randall's always looking for good hands this time of year." She handed him the wrapped bread. "That'll be 15 cents. He placed a quarter on the counter. "Keep the change. Small price for meeting the baker responsible for such a fine smell waking me this morning." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Zora staring at the closed door, a strange warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the ovens behind her. In the days that followed, Preston became a regular customer. He'd secured work at the Double R, just as he'd hoped, and each morning before riding out, he'd stop for bread and sometimes a pie to share with the other hands. They exchanged pleasantries, nothing more, but Zora found herself looking forward to his visits, timing her baking so fresh bread would emerge from the oven just before he arrived. One morning, noticing flour on her cheek, he reached out instinctively to brush it away. His touch, though brief, sent a jolt through her that reminded her of feelings long buried. "Sorry," he said, withdrawing his hand. "Shouldn't have done that." "It's all right," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't. Not really. That evening, Zora sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies dance in her small garden. The squeak of the gate made her look up to find Preston standing there, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Blake. Hope I'm not intruding." "It's Miss Blake now," she corrected gently. "And no, you're not intruding." He gestured to the empty space beside her. "May I?" She nodded, and he sat, leaving a respectful distance between them. They rocked in silence for a moment, the only sound the creak of the swing and the distant piano music from the saloon. I was married once, she finally said, not sure why she was telling him this. Thomas died 3 years ago, influenza. Preston nodded. I'm sorry for your loss. Everyone is. It's all they see when they look at me, Thomas Blake's widow. That's not what I see, Preston said quietly. She turned to him, curious. What do you see? A woman who wakes up every morning before dawn to bake bread for a town that takes her for granted. A woman who remembers everyone's favorite pastry and sets it aside without being asked. A woman with sad eyes but the kindest smile I've ever seen. Zora looked away, unnerved by his perception. You notice too much, Mr. Xavier. Preston, please. He looked up at the stars. And I've always believed noticing things is important, especially the good things. They fell into an easy conversation after that. He told her about growing up in Texas, about riding with a cattle drive up to Montana, about working ranches across 4 states. She shared stories of Willow Creek before the railroad came through, of learning to bake from her grandmother, of the small pleasures that had sustained her after Thomas died. When he finally stood to leave, the night had grown cool and the saloon had gone quiet. Thank you for the company, Miss Blake. Zora, she said. If I'm to call you Preston, then you should call me Zora. He smiled and something in her chest loosened just a fraction. Good night, Zora. As the weeks passed, Preston became a fixture in her evenings as well as her mornings. Sometimes they'd sit on her porch, sometimes walk down by the creek. He never pressed for more, never stood too close, never stayed too late. The town noticed, of course. Willow Creek thrived on gossip like desert plants on rare rainfall. Zora overheard the whispers when she delivered bread to the general store. Awful soon, don't you think? Martha Jenkins was saying to Sarah Cooper. Thomas barely cold in his grave. 3 years isn't barely, Sarah replied. Besides, a woman alone in these parts, it's not safe. And he seems a decent sort. Still, Martha sniffed, some proprieties should be observed. Zora placed the bread on the counter with more force than necessary, startling both women. Good morning, ladies. Fresh sourdough today. They had the grace to look embarrassed, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt, planted by Martha's disapproval, took root in Zora's mind. Was it too soon? Was she betraying Thomas's memory by enjoying Preston's company? That evening when Preston arrived, Zora was more reserved than usual. He noticed immediately. Something troubling you? He asked as they walked by the creek, the water reflecting the first stars of evening. Zora stopped, watching the current flow over smooth stones. People talk. People always talk, especially in small towns. They think it's improper, me spending time with you. Preston was quiet for a long moment. And what do you think? She turned to face him. I think I've spent 3 years living half a life. I think Thomas would want me to be happy. She took a deep breath. But I also think I'm afraid. Of what people say, she shook her head. Of feeling anything at all. It hurt so much when he died. I'm not sure I could survive that again. Preston took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and horses that clung to him. Zora, I would never. Don't make promises you can't keep, she interrupted. Everyone leaves eventually, one way or another. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he simply said, Then I'll wait. Wait for what? His smile was gentle, understanding, till the fear fades. The simplicity of his answer, the absence of pressure or expectation, made tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them away, nodding once before turning back toward town. The next day, Preston didn't come to the bakery. Zora told herself it was better this way, a clean break before things got complicated. But by mid-morning, she found herself glancing at the door every time the bell jingled, hoping to see his tall frame filling the doorway. It wasn't until late afternoon that she learned why he hadn't come. 2 hands from the double R rushed into town, covered in dust and clearly agitated. One of them, a young man named Billy, burst into the bakery. "Miss Blake, there's been an accident out at the ranch. Preston got thrown from a horse while trying to head off a stampede. Doc Sullivan's with him now, but it don't look good." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive, but he took a bad kick to the head. Doc says the next day or two will tell." Without a word, Zora removed her apron, locked the bakery, and followed Billy to where horses waited. She'd never ridden at such a pace, but fear drove her forward, the landscape blurring past. The Double R Ranch house was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Mrs. Randall met Zora at the door, her normally stern face softened with concern. "He's in the spare bedroom. Doc's with him now." She hesitated. "He's been asking for you when he's conscious." Zora's heart constricted. "May I see him, Mrs.?" Randall nodded, leading her to a small bedroom at the back of the house. Doc Sullivan looked up when they entered, his expression grave. "Miss Blake, I wondered if you might come." Preston lay still on the bed, a bandage wrapped around his head, his face pale beneath his tan. Zora approached slowly, as if in a dream. "How is he?" "Hard to say. Head injuries are tricky. He's drifting in and out." Doc Sullivan stood. "Talk to him if you like. Sometimes a familiar voice helps." Left alone with Preston, Zora pulled a chair close to the bed and hesitantly took his hand. It was warm, calloused from ranch work and so much larger than hers. "Preston," she said softly. "It's Zora, I'm here." His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She continued speaking, her voice growing more steady. "The whole town's talking about what you did heading off that stampede, saving those other hands. They're calling you a hero." She squeezed his hand. "But you need to wake up now. You need to come back." For hours she sat with him, speaking of inconsequential things, the weather, the bakery, the book she'd been reading. As darkness fell, Mrs. Randall brought a lamp and a tray of food, insisting Zora eat something. "You can stay the night," the older woman said. "There's a cot in the corner if you want to rest." Zora nodded gratefully. "Thank you." Late in the night, Preston stirred, his eyes opening briefly. "Zora!" His voice was a rasp. "I'm here," she said, leaning forward so he could see her. "I'm right here." "Didn't want to scare you," he mumbled. Didn't want to be another reason for fear. Tears filled her eyes. "Hush now. Just rest." He drifted back to sleep, but his breathing seemed easier, his color better. Zora finally allowed herself to close her eyes, her hand still entwined with his. Morning brought improvement. Preston was awake for longer periods, though Doc Sullivan warned he wasn't out of danger yet. Zora reluctantly returned to town to open the bakery, promising to come back that evening. News of Preston's condition and Zora's vigil at his bedside spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Customers came to the bakery not just for bread but to offer support and, in some cases, knowing smiles. Even Martha Jenkins seemed to have softened her position. "That Preston Xavier," she said while selecting a pie. "Risking his life like that. A real hero." "You'd be a fool not to snap him up, Zora Blake." Zora merely smiled, neither confirming nor denying the implication. But Martha's words echoed in her mind as she closed the bakery early and rode back to the Double R. Preston was sitting up when she arrived, the bandage smaller now but dark circles beneath his eyes testifying to the pain he still felt. "You came back," he said, his voice stronger than the night before. "I said I would." She sat beside him, suddenly shy. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got kicked in the head by a horse." His attempt at humor was undermined by a wince. "But better for seeing you." They talked quietly as the afternoon faded into evening. He told her about the stampede, how a sudden lightning strike had spooked the herd, how he'd ridden out to turn them before they reached a ravine where they would have been injured or killed. "I don't remember the fall," he admitted. Just waking up here with the worst headache of my life, thinking I'd never get to see you again." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside her. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "When Billy came to tell me what happened, all I could think was that I'd pushed you away and now I might lose you forever." Preston reached for her hand. "I'm not so easy to get rid of. I'm beginning to see that." She met his gaze. "And I'm beginning to think that might not be such a bad thing." Over the next week, as Preston recovered at the Double R, Zora made the ride out each evening after closing the bakery. They spent hours talking, learning each other's stories in greater detail, building a foundation of friendship beneath the growing attraction neither could deny. When Doc Sullivan finally cleared Preston to return to town, Zora offered her spare room. "Just until you're fully recovered," she insisted when he hesitated. "It's closer to Doc's if you need him." Preston agreed, though they both knew the arrangement would set tongues wagging even more than they already were. True to form, the gossip intensified when Preston moved his few belongings into Zora's modest home, but something had shifted in Zora. The fear was still there, a shadow at the edges of her heart, but it no longer controlled her actions. She found herself smiling more, laughing at Preston's dry wit, looking forward to their evenings together playing checkers or reading aloud to each other. One evening, about a month after the accident, they sat on the porch swing watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the distant hills. Lightning illuminated the clouds in brief, spectacular displays, followed by the low rumble of thunder. "Reminds me of the storm that started the stampede," Preston said. "Beautiful and dangerous all at once." Zora nodded, understanding he wasn't just talking about the weather. "Some things are worth the risk." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "Are they?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm starting to think so." Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek with his hand. "Zora Blake, I've been falling in love with you since the first morning I walked into your bakery." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Zora covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "I'm still afraid," she admitted, "but the fear doesn't seem as important as it once did." He leaned forward, and she met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss as gentle as it was meaningful. When they parted, the storm was closer, the air charged with electricity that matched the feeling in Zora's chest. "I don't need promises," Preston said. "I just need to know there's hope." Zora smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "There's more than hope, Preston Xavier. There's possibility." As summer turned to fall, Preston returned to work at the Double R, though he continued to stay in Zora's spare room. The arrangement raised eyebrows, but Zora found herself caring less about town gossip with each passing day. They settled into a routine breakfast together before Preston rode out to the ranch. Dinner together when he returned, evenings on the porch or by the fire as the weather cooled. They were careful to maintain proprieties, conscious of Zora's reputation, but the emotional intimacy between them deepened daily. One crisp October evening, Preston came home later than usual, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. "What are you up to?" Zora asked as they ate the stew she'd prepared. "I've been talking with Mr. Randall," he said, attempting and failing to look innocent. "About the future." Zora raised an eyebrow. "And what does the future hold according to Mr. Randall? He's getting older." "Looking to step back from day-to-day operations." Preston set down his spoon. "He's offered me the foreman position starting next spring." Zora's eyes widened. "Preston, that's wonderful. A foreman at your age, that's quite an achievement." "There's more." He reached across the table for her hand. "The job comes with the use of a small house on the property. It needs some work, but it's solid. 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a porch that gets the morning sun." The implication was clear. Zora's heart began to race. That sounds lovely. It could be. He took a deep breath. If you were there with me. She didn't answer immediately, and concern flashed across his face. I know it's soon, he said quickly. And I meant what I said about waiting, but I wanted you to know that I'm planning to stay in Willow Creek, that I'm putting down roots here. Zora squeezed his hand. Show me the house. The next day, they rode out to the Double R together. The house was indeed small but well built, set back from the main ranch buildings with a view of the mountains. Inside, dust covered everything and spiders had claimed the corners, but Zora could see the potential. The roof needs patching, Preston pointed out as they walked through. And that window doesn't open right, but the chimney's sound and the well water's clean. Zora ran her hand along a wooden countertop, imagining kneading dough there, baking bread in the cast iron stove. It's perfect. Preston looked surprised. Perfect. It's half fallen apart. It's waiting to be a home again, she said. Like me. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her in his arms. Zora Blake, are you saying what I think you're saying? She looked up at him, this man who had ridden into her life and waited patiently for her fear to fade. I'm saying I love you, Preston Xavier. I'm saying yes. His kiss was different this time, still gentle, but with an undercurrent of passion that made Zora's knees weak. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. We should get back to town, Preston said, though he made no move to release her. Before we give the ranch hands something new to gossip about. Zora laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Let them gossip. I've spent too long caring what other people think. They rode back side by side, making plans. They would marry in November before the worst of winter set in. Preston would continue working as a regular hand through winter, using his free time to repair the house. In spring, when he took up the foreman position, they would move to the ranch together. The wedding was small but joyful, held in the town church with most of Willow Creek in attendance. Even Martha Jenkins dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony, her previous objections apparently forgotten. Zora wore a simple blue dress, rather than black, the first time since Thomas's death that she'd appeared in public without mourning colors. Preston looked handsome in a new shirt and string tie, his hat nowhere to be seen for once. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with a restraint that made her both grateful and impatient for the privacy that would come later. The town threw them a party at the hotel, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice their number. As evening approached, they slipped away, riding not to Zora's house in town but to their future home at the Double R. Preston had been working on it in secret, and Zora gasped when they arrived. Lamplight glowed in the windows, smoke curled from the chimney, and the porch had been swept clean. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Preston said, lifting her from the saddle. Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The floors gleamed with polish, new curtains hung at the windows, and a quilt Zora recognized from Mrs. Randall's sewing room covered a bed in the main bedroom. "When did you do all this?" she asked, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Every spare moment for the past month." Preston looked both proud and nervous. "Is it all right? We can change anything you don't like." Zora threw her arms around his neck. "It's perfect, absolutely perfect." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, the barriers of fear and hesitation finally broken, Zora marveled at how life could change so completely. 3 years of grief and loneliness washed away by the love of a man who had been willing to wait. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm no longer afraid," she answered truthfully. "That whatever comes next, we'll face it together." He pulled her closer. "Together sounds just fine to me." Winter settled over Willow Creek with a vengeance that year. Snow piled high around the little house, and the wind howled through the pass. But inside, Zora and Preston were warm and content. They established new routines, Preston working with the cattle during the day while Zora made their house truly a home, experimenting with recipes in her new kitchen, sewing curtains and cushions to brighten the rooms. In the evenings, they would read by the fire or Preston would play harmonica while Zora mended clothing. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing dreams and making plans for the spring when Preston would officially become foreman. February brought a fierce blizzard that lasted 3 days. The ranch hands all bunked together in the main bunkhouse, but Preston refused to leave Zora alone in their isolated home. They huddled together beneath the quilt, listening to the storm rage outside. No regrets. Preston asked on the second night as wind rattled the windows and snow piled against the doors. About leaving town for this wild place, Zora snuggled closer to his warmth. Not a single one, though I do miss the bakery sometimes. You could open another one, here at the ranch. The hands would empty their pockets for your apple pie. She smiled at the thought. Perhaps, once things are more settled. There was something in her voice that made Preston prop himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the firelight. Zora Xavier, what aren't you telling me? She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, still flat but carrying a secret. Things might be getting less settled before they get more settled. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. A baby, are you certain? She nodded, suddenly nervous. I'm about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late summer. Joy transformed his face. He gathered her in his arms so carefully she might have been made of glass. A baby, he repeated, awe in his voice. Our baby. His reaction chased away the last of her worry. You're happy then? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her deeply. I love you, Zora Xavier, more than I ever thought possible. The rest of winter passed in a blur of preparation. Preston threw himself into completing repairs on the house with renewed vigor. He built a cradle from cedar wood, sanded smooth and polished to a soft glow. Zora sewed tiny garments from fabric ordered from the general store, and Mrs. Randall taught her to knit soft blankets. As her body changed, growing rounder with the precious life inside, Zora found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The grief that had nearly consumed her, the fear that had kept her isolated, and the patient love that had ultimately saved her. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers across the range. Preston took up his new duties as foreman with natural authority, earning the respect of the hands and the trust of Mr. Randall. Zora planted a garden behind their house and set up a small bread oven outdoors where she could bake for the ranch hands without overheating their home as her pregnancy progressed. In June, with Zora 5 months along, they rode into town for supplies and to visit friends. The changes in Willow Creek were subtle but noticeable. A new family had opened a hardware store. The church had a fresh coat of paint, and the saloon had added a proper restaurant section where ladies could dine without scandal. Martha Jenkins spotted them outside the general store and hurried over, her curiosity about Zora's condition overcoming any lingering disapproval. Well, don't you two look the picture of happiness, she said, eyeing Zora's rounded belly. When are you due, dear? Late August, the doctor thinks, Zora replied, one hand resting protectively over her unborn child. Martha nodded approvingly. Nothing like a baby to make a house a real home. You must bring the little one to town for christening. Preston's hand settled on Zora's shoulder. We plan to, Mrs. Jenkins. The whole town's been so supportive, we want to share our joy. Martha beamed, clearly considering herself included in this sentiment despite her earlier criticism. Well, you just let me know when and I'll organize a proper celebration. Every baby should be welcomed properly. As they rode home that evening, taking it slow for Zora's comfort, Preston chuckled. Amazing how quickly opinions change. 6 months ago, Martha Jenkins thought you were scandalized beyond redemption for keeping company with me. Zora smiled. People see what they want to see. Now they see a respectable married couple expecting a child, so that's acceptable. And what do you see? Preston asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Zora considered the question as they crested a hill, their little house coming into view in the distance. I see a life I never dared hope for after Thomas died. I see a future filled with love and purpose. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the saddle horn. I see a man who waited when I was afraid, who saw me when everyone else only saw a widow. Preston leaned over to kiss her softly. And I see a woman brave enough to love again despite her fear. A woman who makes every day an adventure just by being in it. The summer months brought intense heat to the range. Zora's pregnancy made the hot days uncomfortable, but Preston ensured she had everything she needed: fresh water from the coolest part of the well, a shaded spot on the porch where she could catch any breeze, help with the heavier household tasks. In late July, with the baby's arrival drawing near, Mrs. Randall insisted Zora move temporarily to the main ranch house where help would be closer at hand if needed. Preston initially resisted, proud of his ability to care for his wife, but Zora gently convinced him it was the wisest course. I'd feel safer, she admitted, especially with you off and out on the range all day. The compromise eased Preston's worry, though he still rode back to check on her several times each day, much to the amusement of the other hands. Xavier thinks that baby's gonna come riding out on a pony the minute his back is turned, one of the older cowboys joked. But the teasing was good-natured, and Preston took it in stride. August arrived with thunderstorms that broke the heat, but raised new concerns about flash floods in the lower pastures. Preston was out moving cattle to higher ground when Zora's labor began, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Mrs. Randall sent a ranch hand racing to find Preston while she helped Zora to bed and dispatched another rider for the doctor in town. By the time Preston galloped into the yard, mud spattered and wild-eyed with worry, Zora's pains were coming regularly. "I'm here," he said, bursting into the bedroom. "I'm right here, Zora." She reached for his hand, her face pale but determined. "I knew you would be." The labor lasted through the night, with Preston refusing to leave her side despite Mrs. Randall's assertions that the birthing room was no place for a man. The doctor arrived just before dawn, by which time Zora was exhausted but making steady progress. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Preston's eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered as the doctor placed the swaddled infant in Zora's arms, "just like her mother." Zora gazed down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled but undeniably beautiful. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." They named her Hope, a testament to what had saved them both: Preston's hope that Zora's fear would fade, and Zora's hope that she could find love again after devastating loss. The christening in Willow Creek was indeed the celebration Martha Jenkins had promised. The entire town turned out to welcome the newest Xavier, bearing gifts and well wishes. Even the Murphy boys, somewhat tamed by Preston's steady influence over the past year, presented a small wooden horse they'd whittled themselves. As summer faded into fall, the little family settled back into their own home, now enhanced with a nursery Preston had secretly prepared during Zora's stay at the main house. Life took on new rhythms dictated by Hope's needs, but neither Zora nor Preston minded the disrupted sleep or the constant demands of an infant. "She has your eyes," Zora said one evening as they sat on the porch, Hope sleeping peacefully in Preston's arms. "And your determination," he replied with a smile. "Have you ever seen a baby so intent on holding up her own head?" Zora laughed. "She knows her own mind already. Heaven help us when she starts walking." Preston looked out over the land that had become their home, then back at his wife and daughter. "I never thought I'd have this," he said softly. "A family of my own, a place that feels like it's where I'm meant to be." "Neither did I," Zora admitted. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over, that the best I could hope for was a quiet existence, just getting by day to day." She reached out to stroke Hope's downy head. "I was so wrong. We both were." Preston shifted Hope to one arm so he could take Zora's hand. "But we found our way here anyway." As the years passed, the Xavier family grew and thrived. Hope was joined by a brother, Thomas, named for the man Zora had loved first, and later by twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, who arrived on the 5th anniversary of Preston and Zora's wedding. The small house expanded with each addition to the family, a new bedroom here, a larger kitchen there, always with Preston's skilled hands doing most of the work. Zora's outdoor bread oven evolved into a proper bakery building where she supplied not only the ranch hands but surrounding farms, and even the general store in town with her renowned breads and pies. Mr. Randall eventually sold the Double R to Preston when he retired to live with his daughter in Denver. With Zora's bakery income and careful management of the ranch, they were able to make the purchase, becoming landowners in their own right. Through it all, the joys and hardships, the births and occasional losses, the droughts and bountiful years, they remained each other's constant. The love that had grown slowly, patiently, against the backdrop of fear and hesitation, proved stronger than any challenge life presented. On their 10th anniversary, Preston surprised Zora with a gift, a new sign for her bakery that read Hope's Rise Bread and Pastry, combining their daughter's name with a phrase that had come to mean so much to them both. "Because hope does rise," he explained as she admired the hand-painted lettering. "Like good bread and like our life together. It started small but grew into something that sustains us all." Zora, still beautiful at 38 though, with strands of silver now threading through her auburn hair, kissed him deeply. "And to think I almost missed all this because I was afraid." Preston's laugh lines had deepened with the passing years, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had first caught her attention. "Fear's not always a bad thing, you know. It shows we have something worth losing." "But love is stronger," Zora said with certainty. "In the end, love is always stronger." That night, with their children asleep and the ranch quiet under a blanket of stars, they sat on the porch swing just as they had in those early days of their courtship. Preston's arm around her shoulders, Zora's head resting against him, they watched the moon rise over the mountains. "Any regrets?" Preston asked, an echo of a question he'd asked years before. Zora smiled, thinking of the widow she had been, afraid to feel, afraid to risk her heart again. Thinking of the patient cowboy who had smiled and promised to wait until her fear faded. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Preston tightened his arm around her. "Me too, Zora Xavier, me too." As they rocked gently in the cool evening air, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, Zora reflected on life's unexpected turns. How the end of one journey could be the beginning of another, even more beautiful one. How fear could give way to courage, and grief to joy, if only the heart remained open to possibility. And how sometimes the greatest act of love was simply waiting patiently for fear to fade, holding space for hope to grow in its place.